All right, this is day 41 of the challenge. We'll be going over Galatians chapters 1 to 3. And so, in the beginning of Galatians 1, Paul has his typical greetings. And again, I always feel like his greetings are so loaded with theology. So again, I just recommend reading them. But it always just gets me, how detailed his greetings are. But essentially, chapter 1, he's discussing the fact that there's no other gospel besides the gospel that he's preaching. And he says these things. It's very interesting, actually, when you think about it. He talks about how if it comes from another angel, or if it's another man, and if it's a different gospel, then let that person be accursed. And so from that, we have of course, the founder of Islam, Muhammad, said that he got his revelation from Gabriel, I believe. So there goes that, again, a different, even though it's another angel that's familiar with Christian and Judaistic theology, it's another angel preaching a different gospel than what Jesus had been proclaiming. And also, I believe Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormonism religion, believes to have some kind of same encounter where he had, the angel, I think, guided them, or there were two angels, and he ended up finding the Book of Mormon, the golden book, or what have you. And so, all those post-date with the things that Paul is trying to warn them about, and I think it's just kind of odd that, it's not odd, it's just, it's God, warning Paul to let the people know it's the Spirit. And then the interesting thing about Paul, though, is that, his revelation is established by the encounter of Jesus Christ that was given to him and to the gospel of the Gentiles. In addition to that, he's actually also approved of James, John, and Peter, and I think that's in Corinthians, where he goes over that. It's Galatians chapter 2, actually. So we'll get to that. And let's see, he goes on to talk about his testimony, which is again, includes him being zealous in the traditions of his fathers, the Jew practicing the law and all the legalism behind it, and then how he's revealed by the Son. Then he preaches the gospel without the approval of other people, but he goes and he's preaching. And then it's not till, I think, 3 years later or something like that where he actually starts to kind of get a name for himself, or being noted as a Christian, because he was the guy that persecuted the church, but now he's preaching the faith. Verse 4 says that he spent 14 days with Peter, Cephas, and then 5, it says that they glorified in God because of Paul's, the conversion thing that's happening. Man, the guy that was trying to kill us, he's the one preaching the same message we're preaching. And so it's just really a remarkable thing. And so I think the one thing from this, the practical part, is to understand how important your testimony is. And that the testimony essentially is kind of established. All testimony is the same thing, actually, when you think about it. And I think it's in light of who Jesus is, and that, the life without Christ is this dark place. And that when Christ steps in, the light comes in, and we're able to see things plainly and clearly. And so the testimony that Paul is having is that he lived in this darkness. He was trying to kill people. He had an encounter with Jesus Christ, and then began to preach his gospel. And I think a lot of, there has to be that moment, where you make, you believe, you confess, and you kind of realize. I think maybe in some of our church culture, where you have these young people growing up in the church. That wasn't my case. But I can just feel the struggle almost, trying to grow. You're growing up in this, in the Christian belief system, and so it's like, man, so can that not happen to me? Or I led a pretty good life. I don't really know what bad thing can happen. But I believe, and so I guess he's maybe sometimes of the, I could definitely see that could definitely be a challenge to those who are growing up in our culture in that aspect. But again, everybody has a darkness, everybody's fallen short, everybody's righteousness is like rags before the Lord, and so there must come that time where you realize that, well, whatever darkness, it does exist, even though it may not be the darkest. I think it's just, again, according to what anybody is given. But through that means they find faith in Jesus Christ. Either way, it's just a miraculous, a glorious thing, and the angels rejoice for just one repentant soul. Galatians chapter 2, this is where he talks about that he's he's accepted by the apostles, and he goes on to talk about what I said, how he preach to the Gentiles kind of on the side. And that Titus, the guy that was rolling with him, he was actually a Greek, and he wasn't compelled to get circumcised. So what was happening was a lot of the other false brothers, he claims, Judaizers, I believe is the term that would be used, they were compelling people. And I think that this is actually, I think he addresses this in the Corinth church too, a little bit, about circumcision and how you can't require these people to be circumcised, because if we put them under that part of the law, they're gonna be found guilty of all of it. So let them kind of be as they are. Don't commit them to circumcision. But he addresses, I think, maybe the heart of the people more, because he says that they're false brothers and that we're trying to spy out on the freedom that he possessed, the freedom in Christ that that the law of faith gives, the law of the mind, the law of the spirit. Those things, the freedom that those things give them, according, in contrast to, if they're Judaizers, they're going to try to force all their, all the regulations on them, the letter that killeth, so to speak. So again, he wasn't circumcised. He wasn't circumcised, Titus, that is. And then 6 to 10, we see this kind of the thing where Peter and Paul kind of have this running in. And so I guess what happened was Peter was sitting with the Jews and the Gentiles, but then when I think James came in with some other people, and so Peter actually stopped sitting with some of the Gentiles and only sat with them, and this confused the people, even so much so that Barnabas kind of fell into the same thing. So I guess one, be aware that the actions that we do will influence other people, but then Paul actually ends up charging him up and saying, like, hey, this is hypocrisy. There's no, and again, back to Christ being the thing that unifies both the Greek and the Jew. In Christ we're all one. So there's no need for you to sit over here and sit over there and not over there and not be able to go back and forth between them two. Like Christ has dealt with that division between the people. And then he goes on to talk about how justification. This is verse 15 to, I'll say 7:16. Justification comes by means of faith in Christ and not of works. 17 and 19, that even though they're still sinners, it does not belittles Christ's justification of sin. He talks about that, is Christ, is Christ a servant of sin? He says, of course, certainly not, but that we ourselves we serve, but it's just the fact that we still sin, according to our own doing. So Christ is not serving sin. He's just serving the sinners, so to speak, and that the law of sin is in our flesh, and so in order to follow Christ, we must follow in a different law, which is by faith. And he goes to establish that how the law is death, but Christ is life, and righteousness comes from life, and so therefore it comes by the Spirit that you live and you walk in faith with in Jesus Christ. The same, some of the same stuff that he's talking in Romans and stuff like that, and you have to understand. Because we're dealing with two different types of people. We're dealing with the Gentiles and we're dealing with the Jewish people. And the Jewish people are accustomed to the law, and the Gentiles are accustomed to other practices and cultural practices, and they didn't have the law. And so there's this, again, he talks about this in 1 Corinthians, how they have the stumbling block, which is Christ to the Jew, but then it's also foolishness to the Greek. And so Christ is these things to both of them. It's foolishness. The cross is the crucifixion and all this stuff. It's foolishness. And in Acts, you see that. But to the Jew, you preach Christ, and now he's a stumbling block. There's no way they don't have faith in him because they're used to the law. And so, Christ is the middleman, the mediator. Chapter 3 is one of the concepts there is is it by faith or the works of the law, and he talks about how the Spirit is given gracefully and not out of works. And so the Spirit that we're given, it's not that there's anything that we've done or said or did or whatever, but it was grace. It was given to us. And Ephesians, I think chapter 2 is going to establish that further. Faith is not of work. We're saved by grace through faith, not of works, lest any man should boast. And so verse 6 and 9 talks about Abraham and how faith was counted to Abraham as righteousness, and this was before and apart from the law. Some people would probably say that the law was still existed because Abraham and Abel and Noah, they knew about sacrifices, and they knew about unclean animals, Abraham knew to tithe, and all these things happened where they were before the law was actually given, 430 years later after the promise was given to Abraham. But I think, well, it seems to me that the actual giving of the law is still, it's what actually, the law brought death. And so I think that this, the faith that was counted to Abraham is still by grace. It was counted to him because he believed. And so, Abraham is called the man of faith. Excuse me. Let's see. And so it is, and therefore, because, it was righteousness, it was counted to him as righteousness before the law, and apart from it, it is by faith we also, that we are also, brought to it, justified. And I guess more so that I think he's actually talking about the Gentiles, that even though it's by the same way Abraham was justified by faith, the Gentiles too are in the same boat, so to speak. And he also kind of talks about how the gospel was preached before all this, and that the good news was that through Abraham's seed all generations will be blessed. And so, that is the good news, that even though Abraham didn't do anything. He had faith in God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. And even based off that faith, God makes great claims, and man makes a huge stake in man, so that way he can live out his life in faith. Therefore, the Messiah could come. Let's see, in the future seed of Abraham, they'll all be blessed. Verse 10 to 14, the law is followed by doing them and not by faith. So we don't, you don't follow this is right here, 10 to 14. You don't follow the law by faith. You follow the law by just doing it. And he says that, but Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law so that the blessings of Abraham can come to the Gentiles and fulfilling God's promise to him being Abraham. And I think he also talks about, the faith that he lives by faith in the flesh. And so he's living by faith, and righteousness is not coming by the law, by doing it. Righteousness comes by believing in Christ. And so, and there's, again, the Gospels, the Jewish people, they're used as, there's some kind of Old Testament prophecy, I think, it says that they're like, they are the light of salvation to the Gentiles. So maybe I'll look that up. But again, proclaiming that the Gentiles can receive this salvation. Verse 16 to 17, the promise came first, is what it's talking about. But then 17 to 20, but the law came, like I said, 430 years later. But it doesn't nullify the promise that was used. He's using he's putting it in human terms at first, actually, I think in verse 15, where he's talking about whenever in our human covenants, whenever let's say we made a covenant with somebody or an agreement, when we come into a new agreement, it doesn't nullify the first agreement we have. And so he's saying the same thing, that when the law came in, it didn't nullify the promise that was made to Abraham. It didn't redress that. The law didn't address the promise. And so he's saying that when Christ came, he fulfilled the law, the requirements of the law, and therefore was able to bring about the new covenant. And actually, it makes sense when I think about it. There's a scroll in Revelation, and John, everybody is sad because nobody could open the scroll because it had the seal, and the lamb that was slain was the one that opened the seal. And the thing about, we don't get it this in our day and age, but the thing about those scrolls was that only the person who was written on the seal could open it. And so, like, if it was a deed or a will or somebody, unless it, if it was my father and he left it to me or anybody wanted to know, it had to say David Moy, and only I would be legally able to open it. And so Christ was the only one that could fulfill the law by meeting the requirement that was on it, so to speak. So the seal of the law that sealed death upon humanity wasn't able to be opened until Christ was the one to fulfill it. That's why he says, I came to fulfill the law, not to abolish it. So he came so he can fill it, so he can open it up, so that way the promise, the new covenant, can be established with everybody. So the new covenant is between not just the Jewish people and not just Abraham, but through all nations through Abraham that are blessed. And then it wraps up, it comes by faith in Christ, that's 22 to 23, and then verses 24 to 29 it talks about how the law was the guardian up until Christ, and it tells that was the reason the law was given, so that way they may know what they have, something that points them to the Messiah when the Messiah is to come, and that again it served as their guardian, and that's what the word says. That's what Galatians. That's what Paul's saying in Galatians chapter 3. That wraps it up. That's day 41. Stay faithful. God bless.